Hey guys, WATERFOWLER41 here, and in today's video I got good news and bad news. The bad news is my uniballs on my upper control arms are done. So over the last couple weeks they've been making a ton of noise. I posted some videos on Instagram, but if you want to listen here real quick, if you stand here, you can hear them clicking. And I'll show some videos in a second. I'll fire up the truck and turn lock to lock and you really hear them scream. But the good news is we're going to be replacing those guys with some Core 4x4 ones. Unfortunately, I don't have the Core 4x4 ones, and these things are making so much noise it's almost embarrassing to drive my truck. So in the interim, I'm going to go ahead and throw my factory control arms right back on. I'm not lifted too high, but it's not a long-term solution. Really, all I'm doing is just trying to put a control arm in there right now that's going to get rid of the noise. Ultimately, the Core 4x4 ones are going to be my long-term solution. I just don't have them yet, and I'm getting absolutely sick of this noise. And like I just said, it's kind of embarrassing driving a truck like this and having that noise. But what I'll do here real quick is just to kind of show you some of the noises that these things are making. So if you have uniballs and you kind of stumbled across this video and you're trying to figure out if they're bad, here's what they sound like. All right, so you can tell from the sound that the uniballs are clearly cashed in. It's at no fault to the uniballs. The quality was there. 15,000 miles is pretty long on a uniball that's used in the Midwest. Road salt will get to them. It's going to tear them up a little bit. We'll talk about them. Once I get them off the truck, we'll take a look at them compared to the Core 4x4 ones and compared to my factory ball joints. But really, I'm not surprised that they failed. I kind of anticipated it at some point in time. But honestly, it gave me an opportunity to upgrade another part on the truck, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So like I said, I'm going to pull those control arms out. I'm going to put the factory ones in there temporarily until I can get the Core 4x4 ones, and then I'll show you the whole step-by-step process on how to pull control arms out and install new ones. The good news is I've done this before. It's very easy. Bad news is it does take a very big hammer to break that ball joint free from the upper knuckle, but it's not impossible. All right, our Core 4x4 upper control arms have finally arrived. They're a few weeks delayed, but only for one reason. The ball joints that they use on the original upper control arms that they sell, the Moog problem solvers, are on national back order at the moment. So what I asked them to do is just find an equivalent. I want to make sure that it's still serviceable, but one that's going to get the job done. So enter the Precision Chassis ball joint, which is what they went ahead and installed. And I think this is made by the company Mevotech. So they do a lot of lower control arms as well, kind of the OEM spec ones. But anyway, let's take a look at everything that comes in the kit. We'll take a look at a once over of these upper control arms, and then we'll get right into the installation, so I'm not delaying and not talking too much. Upper control arm, I went with red. You can get a bunch of the different colors. Obviously, they come already assembled with the ball joint already in there. Zerks are installed. These did come with the caps on. I pulled the caps off because once we do install this, I want to hit this with some grease, and it's easier to get this off when these things are off the vehicle itself. They have two different kinds of link styles that will connect to the truck. I went with the FK rod ends. I've never had a control arm with this sort of setup, so I want to try it out. I feel like this is going to give much better articulation. It's a little bit of a price premium, but at the same time, I know Core 4x4 stuff, what a tongue twister, is worth its weight in gold. So I had no issue with the upgraded fee on these guys. So there's multiple different adjustments you can make on these versus your factory ones. And once we get the factory ones out, we'll take a look at them side by side. But what you can do with these is it introduces two additional adjustment points on your control arm. So your alignment guys, when they go in to do the alignment, they could get that spot on, basically really fine tune it. So in the kit, not only do you get the control arms and everything, but you get this custom wrench. And this wrench is so you can adjust these nuts here on the end of the control arm that connects to the truck. So you can adjust your camber and your caster down to the millimeter. So basically what you do is when you get to the alignment shop, you give them this tool and you let them know that, hey, once you loosen up these hex head bolts here, you could you can make additional adjustments right here, and that way, you can get this thing really dialed in there. One important thing to note is when you do make those adjustments, after you're done, you want to make sure that the opening of this nut, so this nut is actually a big sleeve that's all the way inside here. You want to make sure that it's lined up with the opening here so that it basically acts as a clamp when you tighten these hex head ones down. So if you want to make any adjustments here, loosen these up, twist this, it'll move the rod end in and out. Once you get it to where you need it, make sure that it's aligned here. So if you got to go half a turn more, just make sure that that opening is lined up. Then you can tighten everything down here. What else? So Zerks, accessible right up on top. These ball joints I called Precision Chassis, and they said they're already pre-greased, but we're going to go ahead and hit them with a few pumps once we get them installed. And while we're on that topic, they recommended, so Precision said basically any sort of NLGI #2 chassis grease will work. And I called Core4x4 to see what their recommendation was, and they said any molybdenum fortified grease will work as well. So best of both worlds. It's meeting that certification, but it's also moly fortified. We're in good shape. Control arms are super simple to replace. So let's go ahead and get the tire off, or the wheel off the truck, and we'll start working on replacing that driver's side. And then what I want to do is take a look at these guys all side by side. So the Core4x4 next to my factory, next to the original Uniballs that I pulled off that were making all the noise. So let's go. All right, so the first thing we need to do, obviously, is get the truck up in the air and get that wheel off. So let's go ahead and knock that out here. All right, we have the truck up. We got light on our situation, so let's talk through everything. First and foremost, let me apologize. It is nighttime. I was going to try to do this during the day, but it's about 100 degrees and 90% humidity. Not exactly friendly weather to be working in the garage. Not that it's even better or any better right now, but it's at least cooled off a little bit. So gonna need a little extra lighting. Hopefully you can see everything. But anyway, let's take a look and dive into the project here. So all we're doing is replacing this guy right here. All that's holding that guy on is a 21mm bolt up there, 21mm bolt right there, and then a 21mm nut right here. Then we hammer this. You can see, did a lot of work on this before. We're gonna hammer this. It'll pop that upper control arm out of the knuckle, and then we'll be able to remove that completely and install our Core4x4 control arm. Super simple. It really is as simple as that. If this is your first time replacing control arms on your truck, that's gonna fight you. I will promise you right now that that is gonna fight you. So what I want you to do before you dive too far into the project is go out and get a really big hammer, because you're gonna need it, because you wanna break this guy free and you wanna keep that upper control arm in one piece, so you don't wanna use a pickle fork. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get our 21mm wrench up there, our breaker bar. Let's just loosen those guys up, and then we'll come down here and we'll loosen up this bolt right here, and we'll talk about what we're gonna do to break this free before we actually break it free, so you can see the process. All right, so we have our two upper 21mm bolts loosened up. They're not completely removed. The nuts are still in place, so that way nothing goes flying. We have our 21mm bolt nut here loosened up, and you can see I left it still threaded on the ball joint itself, but you could see some threads there. That way when we hit this, we know when it's loosened up, because this nut will be touching the knuckle once the ball joint itself releases from the knuckle. So let's see if we can film this. This will be the first time I've ever filmed the ball joint being removed. Let's get zoomed in there a little bit. Like I said, you're gonna need a big hammer. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit about right here, and what that should do is knock the knuckle, give it some shock in here, and basically free up the ball joint, because the ball joint's basically a tapered fitting inside this upper knuckle, only held on with this nut. So if I pound this guy, there we go. So now it's completely loose, and I'm so stoked that I was able to do that on camera. It's the first time I've ever been able to do that and not absolutely fight it. But you can see now, let's get in there. The nut is now touching the knuckle, and you could see the tapered side of the ball joint actually popped out of the knuckle now. So now what we're gonna do is put a 10mm socket on the end of the ball joint, and then a 21mm wrench on here, and just slowly loosen up this nut. Other thing that I should have mentioned way at the beginning of this step, put a strap through the wheel studs and then hook it to your frame. That way, when this guy does get removed, this whole hub assembly is not flopping all over the place. This brake is probably 20 pounds on its own, let alone the brake rotor and everything else, and the knuckle. You don't want this stuff bashing on one side or the other. With that strap here, it's gonna keep everything in place, again, because you're not using your car jack to hold everything in place. So use that strap there. It's just a safety precaution, just to keep things manageable, I guess. So now what I'm gonna do. All right, so we have our upper control arm completely out, and just a closer look at the, let's go over here so you can see them. Closer look at the bolts that are holding the upper control arm to the frame. It's basically threaded in, so let's say this is the front side. It's a bolt that goes through the control arm, and then there's a wing nut, or this tab nut, on the inside near the coilover, and all that does is just hold up against the frame while you tighten the bolt. So again, this is a 21mm bolt, and there's one on each side. So there's one right there, one right there. super easy to remove once you get a breaker bar on them and get that tab hitting the frame. So now the next thing we're going to need to do is find the right control arm. So you know it's the right one, or correct one I should say, because they are indicated. Let's see. You can see an L there. That'll be our driver side control arm. So we're now going to, I guess, reverse the steps with a little bit of difference because we have the FK rod ends. So in that kit, you have these metal bushings. So you got 4 of these. These, sorry, I'm trying to do this one-handed. These will simply slide right into the FK rod end. There'll be a 1 here, 1 there, 4 total. Carefully slide them in there, and then carefully slide that control arm up into the chassis mounts, and then we're just going to slide those nuts through and reinstall that everything. And then, all right, so I have the upper frame mount bolts already threaded in there. We got our control arm attached here loosely. Now what I'm going to need to do with 2 hands is pick up the control arm and carefully thread it into the opening on top of the knuckle. Then once it's in there, I'm going to put the washer on the bottom of the ball joint, and then this castle nut, and then we'll talk through torque specs once everything's on there. But again, this is a very simple project once you can break that ball joint free. That's kind of it's uphill up until that point, and then everything else is downhill. So let's go ahead and get the ball joint popped into the knuckle, and then we'll talk through torque specs, and I'll show you how to install that cotter pin through this nut so that this nut doesn't go anywhere in the event that it does loosen up. All right, so let's talk torque specs now that everything is fully installed. Upper frame mount bolts, that's going to be 130 foot-pounds, 21 millimeter bolt, 130 foot-pounds on those guys. You're good to go. Down here, a little bit interesting. So first thing you're going to do is torque this to 40 foot-pounds. Then after you torque it to 40 foot-pounds, you're going to want to go 1/2 turn all the way around, and then you're going to want to install your cotter pin. So let's go ahead and torque this down to 40 foot-pounds, and then twist it all the way around halfway. And then what you got to do is be mindful of where the hole is at inside the bottom of the ball joint, so you know where you can flip the cotter pin in. I think it's right about here. So as long as we get one of these openings lined up with the hole here, we're good to go. So 40 foot-pounds, 1/2 turn, 130 foot-pounds, and then we could put then we could hit this with grease. So let's go ahead and torque everything down real quick. All right, so we got everything torqued down one more time, 130 foot-pounds on the frame or the chassis side bolts, and then 40 foot-pounds plus a 1/2 turn. And then you want to line up one of the openings on that castle nut so you could put that cotter pin through. All you got to do is take some needle nose and then bend it. Anyway, everything is installed from that standpoint. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit this ball joint with some grease. Like I said, I contacted the Precision, or I think it's Mevotech, and they did say that those ball joints do come pre-greased, but I'm just going to throw 3 or 4 more pumps in there. It's molybdenum fortified. Oh, geez, I forget the name of it. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below of the actual grease that I use. But again, it's what Core 4x4 and what the ball joint manufacturer recommended. So 3 or 4 pumps on here just to be on the safe side. We're going to wipe everything clean. And then the last thing we're going to do is install the cap on top of the upper control arm. So just a helpful hint. Get a little bit of WD-40 and hit this with it before you go and hammer it in there. It'll pop in nicer, and then you can wipe everything off. But when you do go to hit it in, use a rubber mallet or put a rag on top. That way you're not damaging this. You want this to look nice as the rest of the control arms. So while we have the wheel off, it's a good time to inspect everything else. My brakes are brand new, so we're good to go on that department. Check our sway bar end links, check our front tie rods, check the Bilsteins. They're looking good but dirty. But again, whenever you got your wheel off, it's always a good habit just to kind of check everything once you're in there. So let's go ahead and grease that fitting, put the cap back on, put the wheel on, and then prior to going to get in alignment, we're going to do a side-by-side. So kind of moving some video clips around, but we'll do a side-by-side, and I'll show you the comparison of how these compare to the factory plus the control arms that I had on here before. And then we'll go get the truck aligned, and we'll take a look at the before and after. Let's go ahead and take a look at the side-by-side comparison of the upper control arms that I had, get the truck aligned, and then I'll give you some final thoughts. But that is the completion of the installation of the Core 4x4 upper control arms on my truck. Right, so let's take a look at the upper control arms that I had on my truck, the ones that I was running from the factory, and then our new Core 4x4 ones. So let's take a look at the factory ones first. A couple things to note on these: polyurethane bushings on the frame mount side, a ball joint on the ball joint side. This is a non-replaceable ball joint, so basically when this guy goes, you replace the whole assembly. You don't just push out the ball joint and replace it with a new one. Also, one of the big things that people like to gripe on is there's a lot of plastic to these control arms. So this is like a plastic subframe. I believe there's some metal inside there as well. But all in all, not something I want to be running on a lifted truck where you're starting to articulate the angles of the ball joints a little bit more. More and more folks lately have been posting pictures of their factory control arms popping out. Basically, the ball joint pops out of the socket because it's too far articulated that way. They hit a bump the wrong way and out this guy goes, wheel goes flat, a lot of issues. So that's why it's always suggested that when you're lifting your truck, you want to get rid of the factory ball joints and install a control arm that can articulate to the angle that your new lift kit allows. Let's move these guys out of the way. Let's get to our Uniball setup. Performance-wise, these are like your top high performance, made for race cars, perfect for desert racing applications. So Uniballs, they have their purpose, just not on a daily commuter in the Midwest. And this is why. So you can see inside the Uniball, there's basically a ball inside here, and there was a Teflon lining inside the Uniball itself. What happened is salt got in there, ended up getting inside the opening in between the ball itself and the socket, eating away at the Teflon lining, which is why I got that noise. So Uniballs are great because they have a ton of articulation. They can get to really extreme angles and they can handle some significant abuse. And even when they get to the condition like this, they're not necessarily going to fail like our factory ones most likely will. But again, what you saw in the video, they make an extremely loud noise, so you have to replace these guys. And these are super expensive. I think these are about 200 bucks a pop. So that's why I was able to justify, all right, let's just get rid of the ball joint or the Uniball style altogether and go to a new control arm style. So a little bit different than the factory ones. These had Zerks on the bushings on the frame mount side, so it kept them quiet on that side. But again, Uniball failed, about 15,000 miles, no bueno. These are serviceable, so you can push these out. So there's a pin in there. You can see it with all the rust. Squeeze that pin, pull it out, or C-clip, pull it out, and you can push the Uniball out and then put in a new assembly and throw it back on your truck. These are popular on race trucks. Again, not something I thought was practical for my truck in the long term. So we'll move that guy out of the way. Oh, this is steel frame, so the control arm could take a beating. So, you know, steel tubular frame. This is a lot of the popular upper control arms use the same design. Anyway, now getting to our control arm from Core4x4. A couple differences. FK rod ends. This is going to help with that articulation up against the truck. And then a sealed ball joint. So unlike the Uniballs, this is using a traditional style ball joint. This is the precision one. Got a cotter pin that goes through here on the castle nut. You're going to give you a nice secure fit in the upper knuckle. You can make the adjustments up on top of the control arm. So again, you get that special wrench so you can turn these nuts if you want to adjust the caster or camber of the wheel itself. So basically infinitesimal ability to adjust where the wheel's at in relation to the rest of the car and the ride quality by installing these guys on your truck. So serviceable ball joint, non-serviceable ball joint. I can replace this guy, cannot replace that. Okay, what you'll notice though, some people might ask, is hey, there's a cup, won't salt get in there and destroy the ball joint? In a Uniball application, yes, most certainly that's what's going to happen. What's not going to happen here is salt may get in here. We're going to put the cap on, but even if salt does get in here, and let's say I put grease in here every oil change, I can wipe this out. That salt's not going to get inside the ball joint itself. A ball joint's basically a cup. So this is a cup that's facing down, and then the ball joint itself and the socket and everything is inside that cup. So even if anything gets on the top here, it's not going to be getting into the ball joint. So that's why I wanted to go back to this style. I feel like for the Midwest, when I'm driving on snowy conditions and you got a lot of road salt, this is probably the most practical application here. But like other benefit of the Core4x4 ones is the ability to adjust the control arm in and out and really angle it too, to give you that caster and camber that you need out of your truck to get this super fine-tuned. So let's go ahead and drive around, get the truck aligned here, and then come back and I'll give you my final thoughts on the control arm assembly. All right, the truck is out of the alignment shop and we are good to go. So the truck is riding smoothly, the truck is riding quietly, and the truck is riding straight. You can't ask for nothing more after an upper control arm replacement. Had a quick chat with the technician before I left the shop. He said with the ability to adjust the top of the control arm on the Core4x4 ones with the FK rod ends, he was able to really nail it with the alignment. So awesome on that front. Couple things, if you're considering an upper control arm replacement on your truck, one, consider what lift you're going to end up with. The Core 4x4s are highly adjustable, and when you order them based on your lift height or your resulting lift height. That way they could design it to accommodate the angles and make sure everything's back to factory specs. Second thing to consider, ball joint technology. I had Uniballs, and I will say that the extreme capabilities that they can handle, you know, race conditions and whatnot, it's great. But I'd rather longevity on the ball joints, which is why I went back to the conventional ball joint versus the Uniball. Those Uniballs were screaming after 15,000 miles, and the reason being is they were exposed to the elements here in the Midwest, and they just couldn't handle that. So while they are awesome probably for race conditions, for my Costco grocery getter here, I much rather prefer the conventional ball joints, and they are more than capable to handle the duties that I put on the truck. A couple last things. Core 4x4 has an amazing warranty. So if for whatever reason you find a way to break either the control arms up front, or if you buy the rear, upper, and lower control arms in the back of the truck, they will replace it. It's an excellent warranty. They are gearheads at heart. They off-road their own trucks. They know what kind of abuse these trucks can take, and they put that consideration into the design of the products. So if for whatever reason I go out and break these things, I know I can get a hold of Core 4x4 and quickly get a replacement for the truck. But with that said, that's the upper control arm replacement. Like I said, it's a super easy project. Two 21mm bolts on the top, a 21mm nut on the knuckle itself, and the control arms come right out. With that said, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe below. Keep your eyes out for more videos. Thanks, guys.